Yes, well, each week we talk to New York Post contributor Miranda Devine. But before we go to Miranda, is it any wonder a survey last year found that 3/4 of young Americans aged between 23 and 38 favour socialism over capitalism? We have this in Australia too, don't we? Would it be because the crop in which our political leaders come from are sympathetic towards socialist causes? You take the mayor of New York City as an example, is Bill de Blasio. De Blasio has been New York City mayor since 2014. This is one example of a political leader who has hoodwinked the public. He loves socialism. Any references to his radical activism from his early years have been omitted from his website. In 1988, this de Blasio travelled to the Central American country of Nicaragua during the Nicaraguan Revolution. He was an ardent supporter and admirer of the ruling socialist government, the Sandinista National Liberation Front. This was a leftist regime that received weapons from the Soviet Union and supplies from Cuba. The Reagan administration had denounced the Sandinistas as tyrannical and communist. Well, de Blasio then went back to New York and helped raise funds for the Sandinistas and subscribed to the party's newspaper. The scary part is that when this Bill de Blasio entered the race to be the 2020 Democratic presidential nominee, he addressed a rally in Miami where he shouted a Spanish slogan associated with Cuba's communist revolution and an Argentine Marxist. It rightly sparked backlash. He pulled out of the race through his support behind Bernie Sanders, a fellow socialist. But it's Mayor de Blasio's attacks on private property, which should have New Yorkers and all of us quaking in their boots. In an interview during his mayoral re-election, de Blasio said of private property, quote, "What's been hardest is the way our legal system is structured to favour private property. I think there's a socialistic impulse in every kind of community that they'd like things to be planned in accordance to their needs, and I would too." Keep in mind, this is the mayor of the world's financial centre. De Blasio, he went on, "Look, if I had my druthers, the city government would determine every single plot for land and how development would proceed. That's a world I'd love to see." Well, this bloke's ideas are dangerous. Why should we be surprised when we hear of young people favouring socialism when they hear radical left politicians like this bloke? Here's Miranda. Miranda, good evening to you. Thank you for your time. Well, tell us about this de Blasio.
Look, you've done a brilliant job there, Alan. You've summed him up in a nutshell. He is basically a Marxist. Last week on the radio, he was being interviewed and he just quoted from Marx as if there was nothing wrong with that, as if there was some wisdom that he was going to apply to the city of New York, which he has managed to trash completely in less than 6 years.
And as you say, Miranda, you make the point, sorry, that drug users are on the footpath shooting heroin. This is in his city, smoking weed, drug dealers gathering around hotels and terrifying neighbours. I mean, riots across democratic... Oh, God, where are we?
Well, look, he's defunded the police. That's one of his favoured tactics, taken 1/6 of the budget out of the NYPD, $1 billion. He's housing homeless people in hotels, ritzy hotels in ritzy areas all around the city. And supposedly that's for coronavirus. It costs a fortune. The city is broke and he doesn't warn residents what's going to happen to their neighbourhoods because you get drug dealers suddenly camp outside these hotels. And even then, the homelessness problem seems worse than ever. And they're more aggressive. They're now not just lying on the street with a sleeping bag, but they're setting up entire encampments with furniture. And no one seems to stop them.
No. Well, and take the other side of the coin. I mean, you've got these riots across democratic cities. Biden says they're peaceful protesters. But as you say, there's arson and guns and federal agents pelted with rocks and bottles and Molotov cocktails. Where does Biden stand in all of this? Are people going to support him as a presidential candidate?
Well, they are the Biden voters. These are the shock troops of the Democrats. These anarchists and Antifa people, and I must say also these so-called peaceful protesters that actually give them cover. They know, everyone knows by now that these protests are not peaceful. So if you go out and join in on them, you are actually aiding and abetting this sort of criminal violent activity. And, you know, the other night we had 59 police were injured and landed in hospital. The sort of coordinated chaos that is being created in these cities. It's like a war zone. I mean, it's worse than Afghanistan.
Yeah, quite. That's a good analogy. Just before you go, the medical advisor to Donald Trump, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's a physician, I have to say, and an immunologist. He's been the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases since, 1984 or something. He's saying there could be a vaccine as early as October. What do you make of that?
Well, look, that would be a shot in the arm for Donald Trump for his campaign because he's still lagging in the polls and he needs some good news. It's an unlikely source from Dr. Fauci, who's been really a pessimist on everything. But he is saying that we could find out whether this round of vaccines, shots, this trial that's going on, started on Monday of 30,000 shots, 15,000 placebo, 15,000 of the real experimental vaccine. We should know by October, maybe November, if that works. But then it will take a few months before those vaccines can be rolled out to the whole of America.
Good on you. Great to talk to you, Miranda. We love talking to people who know what they're talking about, Miranda Devine, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks so much, Alan.